Hello and welcome back. So the first video in this demo series, we're going to discuss the SOC Insights tab that lives inside of the Exobot Insights page in the platform here. And really the general purpose of this particular tab inside the environment is to give you some top level information about like, hey, what is Exaforce really doing for me inside of this environment? Things like with the raw logs, the alerts inside of the environment, and just kind of literally saying like, where did we live from maybe like a mean time to investigate to mean time to close, what type of data sources are generating which type of alerts, and really just providing you some insights into your environment. So starting off, you're going to have this particular panel up here that just really discusses, hey, Exaforce, what are you doing for me, with the data that's coming inside of here. So if we go to the most recent day, we can take a look at yesterday. It looks like, there was 2 alerts that came inside of the system. So it could be really, think of anything, CrowdStrike alerts. It could be alerts from maybe your cloud providers, such as maybe like Azure Identity, GuardDuty, plug in whatever vendor that would be, and then them sending their alerts inside of here. And what the Exobots were able to do is take a look at those 2 alerts that came in yesterday and said, hey, you know what, after looking at all the variables, looking at what's normal for the environment, we assessed that these were false positive. And you can definitely look at those and, kind of assess them, especially a relatively light workload, take a look at there was only 2 things inside the environment. But at the end of the day, was saying, you probably don't need to focus your time on these. If we rewind another day, we go look at the 21st, there was 2 more things that came in that day. One was marked false positive, one was actually marked benign. So it's saying, hey, this is true. This event actually took place inside of your environment. But after assessing it, we decided there's really no risk to your environment because of this. This wasn't something that was necessarily false positive. It's true this happened, but really no risk. This isn't something that needs investigated. However, on the 20th, there was 12 alerts that were generated on that day, and essentially it said 8 of them, you don't really need to look at these. 4 of these, we think that you should take a look at these. 4 of these really needed investigative. So that's really one of the ways that you can take a look at this this page inside of here and consume this chart, is just take a look at like, hey, how much is really getting turned green, right? How much is really getting flagged as false positive or benign, versus, the SOC having to say like, typically, all of those alerts, especially like a big day where there's 35 events that happened on September 18th that came inside the environment. But really at the end of the day, it's like only 3 things really needed your attention. And that's how we're able to really, kind of make the SOC more efficient, and just kind of really level them up and help them focus on the things that really matter. Scrolling down, I think this particular chart right here does a really good job of explaining what the issue is that I've seen in many SOC environments, is just kind of data overload, right? It's just like we have all this data coming in, everything's generating alerts from all over, AWS, GCP, Azure, there's alerts coming from everywhere, data coming from everywhere. What should we focus on? And so if we take a look at this one, we can see 70 million events have been ingested into the platform in the last 7 days. Now, one thing that separates Exaforce apart from maybe some of the other tools in the AI SOC space is that not only do we want the alerts coming from your tools, those are definitely valuable. We definitely want those, but also ingesting things like raw logs. Oh, let's bring in our CloudTrail logs, VPC flow logs. Let's go ahead and ingest things like your Okta sign-in logs or Google Cloud or Google Workspace logs, kind of whatever it is. Let's bring in that raw data, and let's bring in the alerts, and let's also ingest the configs. So a lot of these via API offer up their configs as well. So where it's available, we ingest the config. And now if I have an understanding of the environment from a config perspective, I have all of the raw logs coming in, and I'm creating behavioral baseline of what's normal inside of the environment. What does that user normally do? What does that IP normally do? Whoever came from that IP before? Who assumes this role, and what can that role have permissions to do inside of our environment? With all those type of questions automatically being asked and answered inside of the environment, we can make much more, I would say, in-depth determinations on the alerts that are coming inside and being able to more effectively triage those. So if we go take a look, there's 70 million data points that come inside this environment in 7 days. And where it makes sense, we stitch those together in sessions. So a session is just Keith logged in. I went into maybe AWS console or whatever it might be. I did IAM, group management type of things, maybe spun up in EC2, whatever the scenario might be. If it makes sense, we will stitch those together in sessions. So previously, I would just be looking at maybe all CloudTrail logs for Keith, maybe the role that I assumed, and try to figure out, did Keith do all this in one session? Was this spread apart across many different sessions? So you don't have to think about that anymore. It's automatically done for you inside of the system. Exaforce also creates its own detections. So in the last 7 days, we created 123 of our own detections. Now, the thing with detections, I would say, is not all of them are malicious, but 100% of them are anomalous. So basically, with statistical profiling and baselining in the environment, we're able to say we've never really seen that role do that. We've never seen this IP come inside the environment do those things. So they're all things that bubble up. However, after it goes through the triage engine, along with all of the ingested threat findings from other sources, so your CrowdStrikes, your guard duties, your Azure Identity Protection, all of these run through the triage engines. And at the end of the day, it was able to take a look at all of the 70 million data points that come inside the environment and said, you know what? There's really only 9 things in the last 7 days that really needed attention. Go look at these 9 things. That's where we're saying you should focus your time, because all the rest of it, we ran it across behavioral based model or behavioral statistical modeling. We ran it across the alerts and we ran it across config. We looked at all this, did this triaging and said, you know what? They're either benign, it's false positive. You can look at them. They're definitely there to look at our full assessment. But what we're saying is go look at these 9 things. And now all of a sudden, you have a much more achievable workload for the SOC to work on versus taking a look and trying to find the needle in the haystack of 70 million events, or even 123 events, or 90 events coming from third-party alerts. Is go look at these 9 things. So this is really kind of distills it down into saying what really what is the platform doing with our data coming inside of it. Scrolling down here a little bit further, we have things like mean time to investigate, mean time to close. So as you start adopting the platform, closing things out faster, these metrics are going to be tracked inside of here. We break each one down a little bit closer, so you can treat each one a little bit kind of by itself, I would say, as well. And all of this is cross-filterable by the data source charts down below. So if I wanted to go understand, like, hey, maybe what's our mean time to close for data that's coming from CrowdStrike, for example, I could simply just click on this and it'll filter the whole thing down. And it also gives you an idea of what type of data is coming from each vendor inside of here. So for example, AWS, I'm receiving just pure data events. So things like maybe transfers from S3 buckets, things of that nature. I'm also getting endpoint detections, Kubernetes related information, malware from guard duty. So there's a lot of information that's coming from that. Inside of Azure, we're really primarily using it for identity purposes. So that's really it's good. So I could interact with all these and my charts will filter down on those. The last thing I'll show you inside of here is that we also have the category by needs investigation. And this becomes really interesting from a perspective of saying, hey, where are my highest fidelity alerts coming from inside of my environment? And what this is showing me inside of here is that we could see, about 14% of our identity related data coming from Google Cloud. Only about 14% of those really need an investigation. 17% of the endpoint alerts coming from CrowdStrike in the last 7 days, were things that needed investigated. 33% coming from AWS Kubernetes. So actually maybe something that's a little bit higher of things that actually need investigated. So it also lets you know just what's my highest fidelity sources inside of my environment as well. So just kind of an interesting thing, not saying, you could use an opportunity as a tuning aspect inside of here, but ultimately, we still continue want to receive this data inside of here. It's just an interesting way to kind of dissect your different data sources and really understand, hey, what's giving me kind of the highest fidelity information inside of here? And once again, all of your charts will adjust based off of those filters. So I hope you found this informative and stay tuned for our next demo.